We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Scott DeCosenza of LibertyNation.com talking affirmative action in the Supreme Court. Now, in our earlier segments, we discussed what the cases were, what areas of life they impact, and the indications which way the justices might jump on this matter. Now comes to the most exciting part as far as I'm concerned, Scott, and it's really where we can read our tarot cards, gaze into our crystal balls, and see what the implications are of the overturning of affirmative action in the United States of America. Scott, this is a political earthquake waiting to happen, yes or no?
Yes.
All right, good. And that's all we have time for. No, I'm just kidding. So the way I see this, Scott, and obviously I am not a constitutional attorney like you yourself are, but for me it seems that this ruling, which specifically impacts college admissions and racial bias for college admissions. But surely this is going to spread out to every area of hiring practices, appointments, schools, of course, how local cities administer to their constituents. It has the potentiality to be the finger in every pie, doesn't it?
Mark, I think you've undersold it.
All right, I try never to do that. Please tell me that.
Also to the throughout civil society. I'm thinking of all the companies I know of that say at the bottom of their recruiting things, they're an affirmative action employer, for instance. This is seen writ large through large organizations in the country as the way to be. And it's taught and learned at the college level and beyond. So I think that if it's declared to be illegal and unconstitutional to judge somebody on the basis of their race in higher education, we can expect that to kind of, the ripples in the pond from the boulder that's being thrown into it. If this actually goes that way, it's even more far-reaching. But you're right for what you've described in terms of it will go through, all those levels as well to root out this idea that it's cool to, and okay to discriminate against Asians and white people. That's basically what it is, because that's where the rubber meets the road on this. People are being discriminated against because they're white and they're Asian, and it's a big plus factor for if you're black and you're brown. And that's sort of how these things play out, generally speaking, in the admission matrix.
So let's talk about private companies. Rather than federal employers or state employers, just for now, although we'll get to those shortly. If this actually happens and affirmative action is stricken down and the nation then just goes by a strict reading of the law as it's written, in which case it's illegal to discriminate based on race. Do you think that companies will change their hiring practices drastically? Because I understand, obviously, from the educational point of view, that people are being denied a position, which has amazing ongoing effects in their life. But surely a more diverse workforce in a large company is going to be seen as a benefit by many companies, isn't it?
I think that they are influenced heavily by these affirmative action practices in higher education and normalizing that practice. And if instead it's seen and taught and understood by the populace as being verboten to consider an applicant's race, whether that's for a law school spot or whether that's for a spot on the assembly line or in the boardroom, we're likely to see that kind of, reverberate out really through the entire society and lead to a less race conscious, race judging, chosen on the basis of race society. So for all, it's sort of the opposite of the amicus briefs that so many who want to keep race discrimination, they've got their claws in it. They're hanging on.
Wasn't the idea of having affirmative action to move us to a post-racial society because people would have the same skills, because they had the same opportunities as others?
It was to discriminate against others and in favor of those who have been discriminated against in the past, to elevate them. it turns out that race-based discrimination is just race-based discrimination.
And we don't have
a nuanced view of applicants that considers race. So that is how they have kind of sold this to the courts throughout the years, from the Bakke case right up through Fisher is the most recent of the landmark cases. And at each stop, Mark, it's like, well, listen, it's like playing the violin or being a Shakespearean actor. Like, it's just a plus factor. We want this interesting group of people in our student body, and race is a plus factor, can be a plus factor in that regard. Well, that's not how it works when the rubber meets the road. If you look at for instance, if you're an Asian student versus a black student applying to the Harvard College, if you have the best grades and the best SAT scores, but you're Asian, you've got a worse chance than if you're a black applicant and you have like the lowest quintuple. I mean, within the range, they don't take
within the acceptable range.
E's and F's, right? So it's a lie. That's the idea. It's a lie that race is some kind of general plus factor. It's a quota. It's clearly, the data bears this out. It's like, who are you going to believe, me or your own lying eyes? It's sort of the argument that it seems to. If I could tell you this right now, if I was advising someone who was going to be an applicant to the Harvard College or law school or medical school, and they said, should I become a Pulitzer Prize winning author or a television star or get straight A's or a perfect SAT or LSAT score or be black, what would be the best way for me to proceed? I'd say be black.
It's funny. It's funny that you use that example, Scott, because there was a report out recently that I believe it was at least 20% of students admitted to lying about their racial heritage. These were white students. At least 20% admitted to lying, of those surveyed, of course, about having some form of minority heritage, because it helped them, or as they perceived it, helped them get into a college or a more preferential course. And so, it does seem to be very much the example that you're using now.
It's a huge plus.
Yeah,
to be of the preferred chosen race. Absolutely.
But Sandra Day O'Connor, didn't she say that about now would be the time to remove affirmative action?
It's
not far off, right? It's a couple of years either side when she herself, who was one of the
basically said in 20 years we don't know if we're going to, presumably we may not need this. And then later on, after her retirement, she walked that back a little bit and said, well, that was just sort of the starting point for maybe not needing it. The reply from those of us on the other side of this issue is just that, if it's wrong to discriminate against people on the basis of their race, then it's wrong to discriminate against people on the basis of their race. And I am 100% bought in, Mark, to a lot of the arguments that don't account for that morality. So even if we said that wasn't the case, it's actually worse I think it's a worse outcome for blacks. For instance, I'm an attorney. I went to law school. I'm very familiar with how affirmative action works in higher education and law schools. And it would be better for black people, I think, if people didn't wonder if they got into that law school based on the color of their skin versus their grades, whether they had the horsepower. And the same thing is true in the job market. And what we see, it's sort of a dirty little secret. People don't like to talk about it. I might get in trouble for talking about it now, but the black people who go to the highest, the most discriminating academically law schools in the country, when we see a lot of them come out of the law schools, they don't have the same career tracks as the whites who graduate from that. And so instead of being the partner at the law firm in charge of litigation, they're in the Human Resources Committee or the Diversity and Inclusion Club. So it denigrates and diminishes their achievement and success as well.
Discrimination is discrimination, no matter how you cut it. Scott DeCosenza, thanks ever so much for joining us on this special edition of Affirmative Action on Liberty Nation Radio.
Thank you, Mark.
And we'll be right back discussing affirmative action from a black conservative perspective. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5, produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5 is the left-free zone, hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner, joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors, deconstructing leftist narratives, debating the hot topics, and remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.